Okay, um, good morning. My name is Sebastián Córdoba, and today I will talk about the electoral term of 2006, from 2006 to 2011 in Peru. Well, I prepared some index so I can mention more or less like how the structure is going to be of this position. First, I will give some introduction of what is the APRA and who was Alan Garcia, because APRA, the political party, and Garcia were not new in Peruvian politics. Then I will talk about the election of 2006, where Alan Garcia won. Spoiler alert, he defeated in the second round another candidate. Then I will mention some milestones of this period, for example, the earthquake of 2007, some ideological columns that the president published, known as El Perro del Hortelano or The Monger in the Dock in English. Then I will talk about El Baguazo, that it's really connected to these initial columns. Then some corruption scandals such as the Petroaudios and Narcoindultos. And finally, I will give my conclusions. So let's start with the beginning of the beginning. What is APRA? APRA is the oldest mass political party in Peru, founded in 1924 by Víctor Abulaya de la Torre. So before APRA, of course, there were some political parties in Peru, but they did not include the masses. Right? They were just a group of friends who were part of the oligarchy that share power election after election, also with the militaries, some military coups. But APRA was the first one who introduced the popular classes into the political system. Its original ideology was mostly anti-imperialism, state-led development, Pan-Americanism. This means that the APRA wanted to have an APRA in every Latin American country so they can unite them. This was at the end not achieved, and it was mostly a Peruvian political party. But Aya de la Torre created two principles. On the one side, the intellectual politician. This means Aya de la Torre was publishing his work, his ideology, some memorable books of what is APRA, for example, El Antiimperialismo y el APRA, or 30 años de aprismo, where he made an analysis of the party. The party, of course, passed through some ideological... It was not always a coherent ideology, but always with the people, this rhetoric of we are the people and we are against the elite. The Aya de la Torre is usually considered as a classical populist, just as Peronismo or Domingo Perón in Argentina. And another principle of APRA was always power through elections. So they were never into some armed conflict, like the party itself. Some APRA rebelde, yes, but APRA not. And they were always wanted to reach power through the elections. However, in the 20th century, they faced some strong opposition, on the one hand from the oligarchy and on the other from the military, that were mostly interconnected. And Aya de la Torre never reached to become president, and he died in 1979, leaving this really personalist party with his leader. Now, the second question was, who was Alan Garcia? So Alan became the leader of the party in 1983, and he was really popular, charismatic, handsome by this time, and he reached president office for the term of 1985 to 90s. With big expectations, he started his government with 90% approvals. There was like a huge faith that APRA, after so many years of trying to reach power, would implement some reforms that maybe would lead to development and economic growth, and also some inclusion of the excluded masses. However, his government was mostly characterized by hyperinflation due to his heterodox economic policies, such as the statization of the banks or nationalization of the banks. I think was the measurement that he took, and was considered anti-constitutional and faced a strong opposition. And well, he ended up his government with, I think, 9% of approval rate, right? Like from 90 to 9. It's a lot. And well, after the self-coup of Alberto Fujimori, Alan Garcia went to exile and came back in 2001. So yeah, in 2001 he went to the runoff, but he lost. People were like really impressed that after his first term he would still have chances to compete for the second round. And in 2006 he will run again. We see him. This is the right-left spectrum. I put here the most relevant candidates in this time. On the most left, Ollanta, with links to Hugo Chavez and Chavismo and this pink tie movement that was in Latin America during this time. And on the other side, the extreme right. Marta Chavez was representing Alberto Fujimori and Fujimorism. Actually, in this election was the first time that Keiko ran for a public office, and he was the most voted congresswoman or congressman, like the most voted congressperson. And well, Lourdes Flores was also with this like social democrat or Christian Democrats, I'm sorry. And in the center, the ex-president of the transition, Valentin Paniagua. So we had like really clear exactly the cleavages. And well, what happened? Results. Ollanta won the first round with 30%, mostly supported by the south of Peru, the most indigenous and poor zones of Peru, center, also a bit of the north. Then was Alan Garcia. He received huge support in the north of Peru, Trujillo, Chiclayo, La Libertad. These whole regions are historically close to APRA. Lourdes Flores, the center-right candidate, mostly backed by Lima, especially what's called modern Lima, or the most status quo-friendly classes that they didn't want to lose anything or their privileges. Like if you go to Lima, you know that this is the most rich part, like rich, I don't know, but it's the middle class. It's here, and the more you go out of this part, there will be more poverty. Anyways, Marta Chavez 7.7% and Valentin Paniagua 5%. So this Fujimorismo was by this time not a strong force, and Valentin Paniagua, the center candidate, didn't receive any like big support. Well, in the second round, Alan Garcia would become an ally of the center right, especially Lourdes Flores, and also from Fujimorismo, and he would win. He would beat Ollanta, that he stayed in the left with this idea of Hugo Chavez and more an estatist program. And okay, here's the map of the second round. You see whole Lima backed Alan Garcia, as he was seen as the less radical one, and the south backed Ollanta. This is, if you see the map of the 2021 second round elections, I mean Keiko against Castillo, it is really similar to this map. This would be supported by Keiko, and this was mostly supporting Castillo. So these cleavages between regions is not something new. It's something that was happening here, and you can also see historical evidence. But I think we will see that in the next class, in some classes with Barnechea. Well, I already give some introduction of who was Alan Garcia and his past and his ideology in the campaign. Now I will focus more on his term in office. Okay, in 2007 there was some earthquake in Pisco and also in Lima. I was alive by this time. I was living in Lima, and it was a huge earthquake that was led to some destruction of infrastructure in the south, in the coast mostly, yes, in the coast, and the reconstruction of Pisco and The donations that came were inefficient, so this was not something that the government could be proud of, right? This was something that people were critiquing because Pisco was, as is still, not like this, but it is not in good conditions or in the conditions that were before the term. So this was also some important event. And well, here I want to step a bit to talk about El Perro el Hortelano. So, El Perro el Hortelano were some columns published by Alan García in El Comercio in 2007. This is a journal, daily journal in Peru, a really popular one, and from right-wing ideology. And well, here are some quotes of his ideology, right? Or like this, because Alan Garcia comes from this tradition of the intellectual politician. He wanted to justify his new economic policy. For example, here in this part, he's talking about some natural resources that are there and no one is doing anything with them. Like there's no production, there is no investment, there is some resources that are not being used. Then, like in contrast with indigenous communities who think natural resources are something sacred and we cannot just intervene them, and it's the source of life basically. He was arguing no, like we can have more investment and some money. And this is, I think, the saddest part of this whole Perro el Hortelano ideology. It was, these natural resources, they don't receive an investment, they don't generate jobs. This is a taboo of old ideologies. It could be because of taboo of ideologías superadas, ociosidad, like laziness, or indolencia, I don't know how to translate it. Or because of the law of the monger in the dog, that it says, if I don't do it, then no one else should do it. Or el perro el hortelano, someone who doesn't eat and also doesn't let you eat, right? And he mentions here the Amazonia, the Amazon. So, this discursive strategy that the government implemented has been analyzed in this, discursive strategy, because as we remember, El APRA had this strong people-elite divide. There was a classical populist party and also the figure of the intellectual politician, someone who must argue with his ideas to convince people. The strategy of Alan Garcia for this term was this one. Who was Alan Garcia talking to? Right, he was talking to el pueblo, to the people, and well, his discourse was mostly el pueblo and some entrepreneurs and middle classes, together with a aprista government, could, through some regulated state, not an active one, a regulated state and some social democracy, generate investment and economic growth. In this case, they will lead us to development and with social justice. This was kind of like his idea. And on the other side, what were the elites or the foes of development? On the one side, foreign interest, in this case Hugo Chavez and the pink side, together with anti-capitalist minorities and aesthetics, they will lead to manipulation that generate chaos and violence. Right? These enemies of development, and the APRA was pro-development, that in this case means free market and more investment. So this will lead to neoliberal political and economic policies. Here on the left, we see him very happy with Mario Vargas Llosa, a right-wing writer who had these liberal ideas. And here we see him really happy with Bush. They were signing a free trade agreement. Everyone seems so enthusiastic about this agreement that would open, like in words of Garcia, open more investment, that it would benefit the poorest of Peru. What happened 2 years later, after this free trade agreement and this, after the government was implementing this, more like his economic political ideology, there was a social conflict here on the north in Bagua. And on 5 June of 2009, the government ordered a police operation to remove indigenous blockade of a highway. So there were some indigenous who were protesting because in the Amazonas, here is Amazonas region, because the government, especially like the executive, had implemented some laws so the Amazonian resources could be exploited. However, there was no law of prior consultation. No one asked indigenous communities if it was okay to do it, and there was some risk of contamination, and that's why after they protested, they were at the beginning trying to contact some ministers, but no one really listened to them, so they took this highway. And what happened after the conflict was not even the Congress or the executive, because the Congress could also blockade the law, but they didn't. So they show them they don't care about native demands. And after this police and indigenous communities clash, that resulted in 33 deaths, 23 police and officers and 10 civilians. And this was of course a terrible event in this whole government period. This is a really complex problem, and I think here is like a more chronology of how we went to the Baguazo. But I can also recommend you this film. It's called La Espera, and it's like some testimonies of ministers, indigenous leaders. I think it's really good audio material if you want to go more deep into this conflict. So lastly, I would mention some corruption scandals that were part of this government that didn't build a good image. On the one side, the Petroaudios. Here are two. Well, he's an Aprista ex-minister, and he is I think he was the leader. He was running the Petroperú, is the national oil company. But in short terms, they were exposed in a TV show, in this video, in this phone call, talking about some businesses that they want to do, and they were like super happy, and the audios are really explicit of how this corruption works in Peru. Alan García called them rats. They are two pair of rats that they don't have anything to do with the government. And well, some TV show parodied these two guys with his, like some rats. And this was also in the collective memory of many Peruvians. It was, I remember also seeing this. I wanted to mention it. And well, lastly, the narcoindultos. This was also some corruption scandals because even though it was not during the government, it was known after that during this time, Alan Garcia found that it was a good idea to liberate some narco traffickers. Agravado means someone who was captured with possession of drugs. Like it's hard to be innocent after you are, after they find you committing a crime, right? So he found it a good idea to liberate them because the president can liberate any person in Peru. Legally, it was not illegal, but people were asking, okay, why just narco traffickers? So it's more led to corruption and also created a bad image of the government. Okay, thanks for listening until here. I will present now some conclusions of this term. The 2006 to 2011 APRA government marked a clear shift of Alan Garcia toward neoliberal economic governance, even though initially the APRA represented as a center-left party. Even though in the elections they were running as center-left and criticizing neoliberalism, once in office, they argue that no, times have changed. Now we have to play with the free markets and position ourselves better in the world economy. So, yeah, it's some term. It's caused because of some crisis of representation in Peru, and yeah, especially this was the last time some old political parties or the APRA, or yeah, these whole 5 political parties played a main role, and it would start with Fujimori. This would lead to another time in historical political, how do you say it? Political historical? Well, political history, in the political history of Peru. Right? This will be the last time that classical political parties participated and we had this clear representation. Nowadays, the parties that we have are new, created for the election. So, anyways, investment extractivism and macroeconomic growth was prioritized over redistributive policies. The discourse of El Perro el Hortelano framed these indigenous communities, environmental actors, and critics of the model as obstacles to national development, as we already saw. But however, the Baguazo exposed the structural limits of this development model. And also the government achieved strong economic growth and poverty reduction. It also generated high social conflict, low approval due to corruption scandals, and political polarization, particularly in indigenous groups. So yeah, the GDP and the macroeconomic numbers were high because of this commodity booms that happened in Latin America and the investment that came to Peru. But capital was the most benefit from this, but labor was not so benefit from this government. So at the end, these are some of the conclusions that I can present now. Well, thank you very much for the attention, and see you later.